So it's not that hard to understand that we've got diamond tipped or diamond equipment that we're cutting and shaping masjids out of granite with. There's a huge amount of work that is going on. Huge amount of work. And so with the Hanafis coming in after being in the cold with regards to investment, they began to put a lot of money into their books. And so although it wasn't right, and a lot of it, because there was some of the persecution of the Ash'aris, a lot of it wasn't right, but it was an attempt to try to put down excessive philosophy and other things that they believed would slow down the victorious role of the Ottomans throughout their domains. It's also of important note that in Central Asia, as we discussed before, Hanafi was synonymous with Maturidi. And so the Ottomans, who are Hanafis, who are what? Central Asian, they're Turks. They could not understand someone saying, like the Damascus, that we're Hanafis, but we're Ash'ari. That did not compute, that did not make sense. And so anything that provided contradiction or might disrupt it, the Hanafis that were Maturidis and Ottomans saw it as their duty to stamp out any contradiction. Anything that might cause any doubt in the mind of a common Muslim, stamp it out. Worry about the consequences of it later. So even sometimes things that were valid difference of opinion, they were beaten down because we don't want this right now. Not now. Once we've consolidated, fine, but not now. And so whether we say it's right or wrong, you have to look at some of the wisdom that they were using, some of the principles behind what they understood. So the Hanafis shifted and moved to Istanbul. And their ulama, it was no exaggeration that Ibn Imad said their ulama became the greatest of the ulama in their time and thereafter. Because if you look, and it doesn't matter which of the four madhabs you refer to, most of the foundational books that summarize the fiqh, Hanafi fiqh, Ibn Abidin, Kasani, Haskafi, those are Hanafis from the Ottoman era. Summarize those books. This Imam Abdul Qadir al-Taghlabi, great alim from the Ottoman era. A lot of the Shafi'i books, the commentaries that have been broken down and summarized, Ottoman era. They produced some of the greatest scholars, and in addition to that, they produced some of the greatest scholars and men of ihsan. Who can say that the Naqshbandi Mujaddidiyya, the real Mujaddidiyya that the Ottomans were, look at what they produced. Look at the type of scholars they made. Diyauddin Khalid al-Baghdadi, one of the greatest Naqshbandi ulama that ever lived. Imam Dawood ibn Sulaiman al-Khalidi, one of the greatest ulama that ever lived in his time. Now, the challenge that they faced was this one. The Mujtahid Murajjih people were almost extinct. So you were coming out of the era, because we remember discussing before that you would have one alim who was in charge of 4 countries. You would have one alim that was a qadi over 6 districts. The Mujtahid Murajjih people began to die out. So what you started to have were ulama in which an alim would be in charge of each city now. So you would have an alim, he would be in charge of Chittagong. You'd have one alim, he would be in charge of Delhi. One alim, because the Murajjih people were getting so thin and dying out that you did not have the same caliber of people to replace them. And the Mukharrijun, those people, the Mujtahidun al-Mukharrijun, the people that make fatwa for new incidents that happened, were busy dealing with all these new incidents because of the Ottomans coming into power and all the new things that happened with them coming in, that some of the basic masail that the laymen had, they couldn't deal with those. Not because they didn't have the ability, but because of time. You don't come to a Mujtahid Mukharrij about, Akhi, I have a question about wudu. These are people that are dealing with issues that impact the entire ummah. They're known as the marja'. The marja' means the authorities that people turn to. These are the people that meet, that decide global issues for the whole ummah. They're not the people that you come to and say, yes, I had a question about if your wife is disobedient. I have a question about if your husband's disobedient, is allowed to hit her back, or whatever else, or if your wife is disobedient. You don't ask them these questions, because those people are there for the wider issues. It's the local mufti of a city or a province that you say, Mufti so-and-so, such and such has happened. What do I do about this? They're the people that cover it. So that's what happened. The Hanafis had to come in from the cold. Yemen, later decades, would see that these fissures between the Ash'ari and Maturidi scholars were repaired over time by them working together on collaborative efforts. Yemen rejoiced in the year 901 AH when for the first time the seminal commentary of Imam Ibn Hajj al-Asqalani, Fath al-Bari, was brought to them from Mecca. Previously, muftis there had been concentrating on fatwa and resolving difficult disputes. But now the heavy research turned towards hadith, the different gradings, and resolving contradictory reports. So what happened is the people that were focusing on fatwa, they had not seen Fath al-Bari, the commentary. They'd heard of it, but they'd not seen it. So Imam Ibn Hajj al-Asqalani's book is brought to them. You know, he's a major Shafi'i scholar, and they're Shafi'is. They decide that they're going to act on what's within that book. And the emphasis switches from fatwa to looking at hadith. If you go to Yemen today, Tarim, Hadramaut, wherever, you'll see now the big emphasis is on hadith, 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 hadith. Heavy emphasis on hadith, this, hadith, that. Fiqh is there, but there's emphasis on hadith. Now, that's the case. But you go back then, all those hundreds of years, the emphasis was in a different area. So Ibn Hajar's book changed the face of things. The answer to Ibn Hajar's book, Umdatul Qari, changed the debate between Hanafis and Shafi'is, because when some of the Hanafi laymen read that book, some of them felt energized by the proofs that were within it and began to try to debate. So you'd find Imam Ibn Hajar or other Shafi'i ulama in their class. These are qadis, judges. And there would be laymen in the class saying, yes, but our Imam Al-Aini, he says that this statement that you've quoted is not true. Or he says there's another hadith. These are laymen. But they wouldn't denounce them because they know that they feel that himmah because of the knowledge that they have now. So they felt confident. And so they used to circulate these rumors by some sheikhs that, yes, the Shafi'i madhab, it's all based on weak hadith and they don't have any real knowledge, and the Hanafis are the only ones with strong hadith, because there used to be this big rivalry between, there still is in some ways, this rivalry between Shafi'is and Hanafis. Most times it's been quite amicable, but sometimes it's flared up where they've like damaged each other's minbars or they've destroyed each other's minarets. But that's not been the ulama, that's been mainly some of the laymen that get energized, that become overzealous, that say, you know, no, I'm going to go after these people. And some of the laymen said, I would never marry a Shafi'i, or some of the Shafi'i laymen said, I'd never marry a Hanafi, and bizarre things like this. But these are things that come from the himma or the himaya of laymen. They don't come from scholars. No scholar in worth their salt is going to tell you, hey, don't marry this person because of their fiqh. This is ridiculous. Now, further to this, we see that a comet appeared in the sky at the beginning of 906 AH after rising first in the land of Najd in Arabia. A huge earthquake then rocked the city of Aden in 908 AH, and then a massive fire started thereafter. 909 AH brought with it the Imam Abu Bakr al-Idrus al-Shadhili's death. He had been praying for a way to help him stay up at night, or to be able to wake up for tahajjud prayer. Imam Abu Bakr al-Shadhili believed that victory came when he discovered, quite by accident, coffee beans in the land of Yemen. After grinding them and drinking it, he was able to stay awake at night. News of this spread, and soon coffee was in further parts of Yemen, Al-Hijaz, Sham, Egypt, and the rest of the Muslim world. A huge debate then erupted, with some scholars, particularly Shafi'is, taking the position that it was impermissible. Some of the scholars who held this position include Imam Shahabuddin al-Ithnawi, Imam al-Qutb ibn Sultan al-Hanafi, and Imam Ahmed ibn Abdul Haq al-Simbati. Most held the position of permissibility, although they split into two camps, one believing it to be strongly disliked and another believing it to be permissible without anything disliked attached to it. So when coffee came about, there was a huge dispute because they saw that when people were drinking it, they were getting a reaction from it, like a stimulus. It's a stimulant. And when they saw this, that people were staying awake, and they saw that people started to open what were called speakeasies. So they would gather together in what looked like small cafes in the back of a madrasa or in the back of some place, in the back of a market. And they would sit down and drink coffee and talk about the politics of the day and these other things. And they would drink 3 or 4 cups of that and not eat. And the adhan would go by and they wouldn't heed it. Right? And it got to the point where some of these people began to say that they can't live without coffee. That if they don't have coffee in the morning, they won't be able to survive. Do you now understand then why some of the ulama said, well, this is clearly an intoxicant, this is haram? Do you understand that? And why most of the ulama went to the position that no, it's permitted, although they split into two camps regarding it being permitted. Some of them saying that it's permitted, but it's disliked because you'll develop an addiction towards it, and it takes you away, and it can be an addiction like an addiction to other things that are impermissible. Some of them saying, no, that's not the case at all. But you need to understand the effect that it had. So people would open these speakeasies, and they'd gather together, and they'd drink coffee out of these big mugs. And they'd sit down and talk about politics and other things and play backgammon. And so they'd be playing backgammon and drinking coffee, and the adhan is blasting away, and they're doing all these other things. And so the backgammon, and they're fighting over who won because they can't remember who rolled the dice last because they've had 3-4 cups of coffee and their eyes are bloodshot. And all these other things are happening to them. Because remember, there was no cafe au lait. There was no espresso. There was no Americano. Coffee back then was uncut. Coffee was uncut. So you took the coffee, you crushed the beans, and you boiled it, you percolated it, and you drank it straight. You'd have it with sugar, but there was no cafe au lait. So you're having coffee straight. If you have any doubt in your mind about why some of these ulama pass the fatwa that they have, I personally defy you to go and buy a container of Folgers. To take out 1 scoop, don't put it in the coffee machine maker, put it into the cup. To pour hot water into that cup to stir it, and to drink it straight as it is. And to see the effect that it has on you from that moment up until an hour or 2 hours after. And I guarantee there will be a noticeable change in your alertness, your reflexes, and everything. And it's for that reason that why you have a minority of ulama, including some Hanafis, that said it's haram, mainly Shafi'is that said it. But that's why. Most of the ulama went to the position of it being valid, while they split into two halves, whether it's disliked or not. But you need to understand this. And that's why it wasn't until the early 20th century that you started finding coffee cafes in the Muslim world. Because it was seen as something that low-class people did. That they sat in a cafe and drank coffee. You know, it's like you were someone uncouth. You know, your mother didn't raise you right. You came from a bad family. You were walking on the wrong side of the tracks. You fell off. And the reason why they held that position is you found that the people that were involved in the coffee and these speakeasies, they did neglect their salah. They did play a lot of backgammon. They didn't heed the call of the adhan. And they didn't pray regularly enough. You see, the ulama are looking far beyond what you and I normally look at. We just take it for granted. Buy a big container of Folgers. We just take it for granted. But the ulama don't take things for granted.